The Friso-Hollandic Wars, also called Frisian-Hollandic Wars, were a series of short medieval wars consisting of the attempts made by the Counts of Holland to conquer the Free Frisian territories, which lay to the north and east of their domain. These wars were waged off and on from 1256 to 1289, 1296 to 1299, and from 1345 to 1422, although it could be argued that a state of war continued to exist between the County of Holland and the Frisian territories till well after the year 1500. The combatants. The Frisians were at that time unique in Europe, in that they did not adhere to the feudal system. In fact, since the time the Frisian territories had been part of the Frankish Empire of Charlemagne, they had drifted away from mainstream European culture on a separate course, similar to that of the Swiss Confederation. Egalitarianism was such that no noble class started to develop until the late 13th century. And even then these nobles were only being firsts among equals, with only as much power as they could grab. Instead of being granted such power by a liege lord, these nobles were called chieftains. The so-called Frisian freedom took the place of the feudal system in Frisian society. According to a popular myth, Charlemagne had granted the Frisians their freedom, that is to say, freedom from any and every lord excepting the Holy Roman Emperor. A fake charter sought to legitimize this freedom, a not uncommon behavior in those days. In an age when feudalism was embedded in religion, with every man having a lord above him, a king over the lords and God over all, the Frisian freedoms were seen as a sort of anarchy, or worse, a rebellion against God's will, and scandalized the rest of Europe. The Frisian lands in those days stretched along a large part of the North Sea coast, including West Friesland, now part of North Holland, the Dutch provinces of Friesland and Groningen, excepting the city of Groningen, the German districts of Ostfriesland and Friesland, and two small areas east of the Weser River, Wersen and Woerden. The Hollanders. The conflicts between the Counts of Holland and the Frisians have a long history. Arnulf was the first Hollandic count to wage war on the Frisians. Since the 12th century the Counts of Holland made claims on a large part of the Frisian territories. It is hard to ascertain what they based those claims on, and although several historians have delved into the matter, they have not as yet come up with any conclusive answers. The case is complicated, because contemporary writers hardly paid much attention to such a side issue, while later sources are filled with anti-Frisian propaganda. The usual source which is quoted in this instance is Melis Stoke, a chronicler in the service of Count Floris V of Holland. But although he tries to back up the Hollandic claims on the Frisian territories, he lacks sound arguments. He suspects the Counts of Holland obtained their rights as heirs to Juan Gerolf, Count in Friesland, who had been Count of Holland during the Franconian period, which was at that time a part of Greater Frisia. But even there he has to admit it is only a suspicion. In the 13th century the County of Holland entered a period of expansion, not unlike those which occurred in England and France at virtually the same time. This was at the expense of the Bishopric of Utrecht, but also of peripheral territories like Waterland and West Friesland. In all, the Hollandic Wars against the Frisians can be compared with the English wars against the Scots, the Welsh or the Irish. In both cases the enemy was not considered honourable, and in both cases there was a certain religious element at work. Civil wars. Holland and Frisia both experienced protracted civil wars in the same period. In Holland the Hoek and Kabeljauw parties fought for power, and sometimes this was aggravated when there were two candidates for the countship and both sought support among the nobles. Their positions were not always clear, both claimed to fight for the preservation of the Frisian freedom, even though their infighting jeopardized this freedom. The West Frisian War. In 1256, Count William II of Holland, who was also King of the Romans, that is to say, Emperor-elect of the Holy Roman Empire, tried to conquer West Friesland, which lay to the north of his county, on the same land mass. It was a winter campaign, because the marshy nature of the terrain made a common summer campaign unfeasible for knights on their heavy horses. However, in the Battle of Hoogoud, the count went through the ice and was killed by the West Frisians. He was succeeded by his young son Floris V, whose age prevented him from avenging his father immediately. In 1272, however, he resumed his father's war. Although this first attempt of his to conquer the West Frisians failed, and he was forced by circumstances to let the matter rest for a decade, he did not give up. In 1282 he made another attempt. Unlike William II and his predecessors, this time, Floris V did not attack West Friesland from the south, but rather, he built a fleet, sailed around the coast, and came at his enemies from the rear. With this strategy, he succeeded in conquering several regions. It took the disastrous flood of 1287 and 1288 for him to finally break the resistance posed by the West Frisians. Even so, it was not until 1289 before all resistance was firmly quashed. After the death of Floris in 1296, however, a large portion of West Frisia revolted, especially around Westflinge. On the 27th of March 1297, at a battle near Vroonen, the army of Holland and Zeeland defeated the West Frisians. The village was destroyed during the battle, and all the men of West Frisia who could fight were killed, leaving a region of women, children and old folks. From 1299, the Counts of Holland assumed the title of Counts of Holland and West Friesland. Backgrounds to the relationship between Holland and Friesland. Across the Zuiderzee, which is today Lake IJsselmeer, lay the Frisian territories of Westergo and Oostergo. After subduing West Friesland, the Hollanders turned their eyes east, to the Frisian territories across the Zuiderzee, in particular to Westergo. In 1310, Count William III of Holland came to a reconciliation with representatives of Westergo, whereby the Frisians of Westergo acknowledged him as count and granted him certain rights in their territory in exchange for him recognizing certain privileges of theirs. William III had thought he would be able to quietly assume more rights over time, but the Frisians had no intention of letting him do that, and he got nowhere. In 1323, the agreement between Holland and the Frisians fell apart when William III got impatient with Frisian intransigence and the Frisians started expelling Hollanders and their Frisian supporters. In 1324 the rebellion was in full swing, and in 1325 it swept through Staveren. From 1325 to 1327 there were open hostilities, mainly at sea, between Hollanders and Frisians. Representatives of Staveren opened negotiations with the Hollanders in 1327, which led to a new agreement the next year, mainly on the same terms as the one from 1310, although Westergo did make some concessions on the appointments of certain officials. But in 1337 William III died, and his successor, William IV, was recognized only in Staveren, as Westergo used the succession to break away from the formal authority of the Counts of Holland. This resulted in renewed hostilities, again mainly at sea, between Hollandic and Frisian ships. In 1344 the pro-Holland party in Staveren was defeated, and Staveren also broke away from the Counts' authority. In the same year negotiations took place, but the Frisians had, apparently, stiffened their spines since 1327, and refused to make concessions. With a true knight-errant as the new Count of Holland, this made war virtually inevitable.